Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So today I want to talk about the great trade war that just happened between China and the United States. And basically how China won against the world's largest economy.
China.
So the summer of 2025 marked one of the most dramatic economic confrontations between two superpowers. All right, so President Trump has returned to office with an audacious vision, used tariffs as a hammer to bend China to America's will, just as he'd promised during his campaign. By April 2025, Trump unleashed what he called Liberation Day. He's gonna liberate the country, slapping a sweeping 34% tariffs on all Chinese imports, with plans to escalate further. This was supposed to crush Beijing into submission, to bend them into America's will. Well, as you probably all know, that didn't work. What began as Trump's calculated leverage quickly spiraled into an unprecedented trade conflagration. By October 2025, U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods had reached an astonishing 145%. Levels not seen since the Smoot-Hawley era of the Great Depression. The Trump administration layered tariffs upon tariffs, okay? Call it the Liberation Day duties, all right? Section 301 tariffs dating back to 2018, fentanyl-related tariffs and reciprocal tariffs designed to rebalance the trade equation, because Trump felt that, a lot of countries and everybody's taking advantage of America, and that, he needed to strike back, to take some control back. Some Chinese products face cumulative duties stacking on top of each other, making American imports astronomical. Trump believed this hammer was irresistible. He wanted four things from China. He wanted a reduction in fentanyl trafficking into the US. China's not necessarily trafficking fentanyl into the United States. What he's referring to is that the Mexican cartel or whatever in South American that are making fentanyl, a lot of that precursor, the material that is used to produce fentanyl comes from China. And I guess Trump wants China to limit those products and not to sell them to South America, for China to stop the fentanyl trafficking into the US. So just kind of give you a little bit of background on that. All right, so now he also want return of manufacturing to American shores. And also too, he wanted a restored trade balance and forced sale of TikTok's US assets. That China facing such unprecedented economic pressure would cave. Well, China did not cave. As a matter of fact, China counterattacked. Okay, instead of retreating, Beijing responded with its own escalation. Chinese tariffs climbed to 125%, matching America's aggression with calculated symmetry. More importantly, China wielded weapons that America couldn't easily counter. It slapped massive tariffs on U.S. agricultural products, devastating American farmers with 10 to 15% duties on soybeans, corn, wheat, cotton, and other staples. By October 2025, U.S. agricultural export to China had plummeted by 73%, with farmers losing over $6.8 billion in export and facing a projected $5.7 billion in losses in just soybeans, because China was about to unveil their most potent weapon yet, its control of rare earth minerals. These 17 minerals form the backbone of modern electronics, from smartphones to AI chips to military equipment. China processes nearly 90% of the world's rare earth elements. By October 2025, as negotiations intensified, Beijing tightened control on these exports. Suddenly, American companies couldn't source critical materials for, fiber optic cables, semiconductors, and advanced weapon systems. The rare earth gambit just changed everything. But the question is, didn't anybody in administration think about this? Didn't they know that this is a card that China can play? Because if you're going to start a war with your enemies, you need to see every angle. You need to know, okay, if I counter this, it's like a chess. And if I make this move, they may counter this way. If I do this, if I do this, they may counter that way. All right. Trump team realized, hey, geez, guys, I think we made a big mistake here. I mean, no one thought of this. No one warned Trump. The thing is, China was not collapsing. It was demonstrating that America's ability to maintain technological dominance depended on Beijing's cooperation. Now, the question is, how exactly did China do this? How did they survive the trade war? All right, well, China's economy didn't crumble as Trump expected. Instead, Beijing deployed sophisticated survival strategies. Diversification away from America. Chinese exporters stopped relying exclusively on US markets. Businesses like Derek Wang's cookware company pivoted to Brazil, Japan, Malaysia, and Cambodia. By May 2025, the US represented just 11% of Chinese export, down from 19% in 2017. But Chinese export actually grew by 6% year over year for the first 3 quarters of 2025, beating forecast. Supply chains, the thing is, China saw this coming, right? So this is not the first time. So China, what they did is they basically accelerated their own technological development. Okay, instead of purchasing American chips, like say from NVIDIA, Beijing instructed local firms to champion homegrown champions like Alibaba and Huawei. The government launched anti-monopoly investigations against American chip makers, signaling that foreign dependency was no longer acceptable. This strategic statecraft channeled resources towards critical industries, strengthening Chinese technological independence. Beijing also, they allowed the yuan to weaken slightly. So what does that do? Well, it makes export a lot cheaper. Manufacturers basically cut prices to maintain volume, absorbing the margin losses while expanding market share in Southeast Asia, Europe, and other regions. Now, what is the playbook? Well, the playbook was pretty simple. Make up in volume what you lost in margin. The Chinese government deployed targeted economic stimulus, trade credits, rebates for affected export industries, and upgraded free trade zones to cushion the shock. Despite facing deflation in the collapse in property sector, China's economy actually grew by 4.5% in 2025, with economists predicting similar growth throughout the rest of this year. China has leveraged its critical materials. China held firm, knowing that a complete collapse in rare earth access would devastate global supply chains. American defense contractors, auto manufacturers, tech companies, all of these guys, everything that we're using, like, this microphone that I'm talking into, what you're watching the video on, the light, all of it depend on those materials. Beijing's willingness to weaponize that dependency was a credible threat. Now, here's the question. Who actually won this war? So by October 2025, Trump faced an uncomfortable reality. His trade war was not producing victory, it was producing instability. Manufacturing jobs weren't flooding back to America. Instead, the US lost 42,000 manufacturing jobs between April and August of this year. Economists predicted the current tariffs regime could ultimately cost about 1 million to 3.5 million American jobs. Guess what? The Chinese economy and businesses, they were thriving. They're doing just fine. What they did is they just redirected their goods to hungry global markets. People just want Chinese stuff. So by October 30th, at the end of October, Trump and Xi, they met in Busan in South Korea. What emerged from that meeting was just a 1-year truce that amounted to a stunning reversal for the Trump administration. First, let's go over that. We're going to examine what each side gave. All right, so first, we're going to start with the US. So, US concessions. The United States agreed to reduce fentanyl tariffs from 20% to 10%, cutting the average tariff rate on Chinese goods from 57% to 40% to 47%, down from his peak of 145%. That was a massive rollback. for Trump's leverage. Also, the US also, they suspended that 24% reciprocal tariff rate, keeping it at just 10% for another year through November of 2026. Trump's Commerce Department suspended all export control, expansion rules. So basically all that, we're going to send Chinese chips, we're not going to do all that stuff, or we're not going to send them technology, or Lucia, that they just out the door. See you later. That limit on restrictions and all that stuff, we can't let Chinese access our technology and all that stuff and everything. That's just out the window. We just we're not going to do that because we need the Chinese to buy our stuff. The US also paused its own port fees on Chinese vessels. This is not trivial concessions. These concessions that these reversal, they represented Trump's trading away elements of national security policy that had previously been considered non-negotiable. Perhaps most humbling, the Trump administration is essentially admitted it had nowhere left to escalate. It threatened 100% additional tariff. When there's, we're going to threaten additional, it's threatened 100% additional tariff. They said, we're going to vanish from the table. So that was embarrassing. So now let's take a look at what did China give up. What were the Chinese concessions? By contrast, China's commitments were far more modest and many remain unconfirmed. Beijing suspended its rare earth export control for 1 year. Suspended, not eliminated. They suspended them. This means that China returned its ace of spade. It could reimpose control anytime after November 2026. China also agreed to suspend all retaliatory tariffs imposed since March 2025 and to lift sanctions against American companies. It also committed to purchasing soybeans again. At least 12 million metric tons in the final months of 2025. Maybe at least farmers, get something for Christmas and New Year's. At least, they're not losing so much money. And basic 75 million metric tons annually between 2026 to 2028. This was economically rational for Beijing since American soybeans were needed for animal feed. It also symbolically allowed Trump to claim, agricultural victory, which he did. He's not going to miss an opportunity to do such a thing. China further agreed to enhance fentanyl cooperation, though this was largely an extension of work already underway. So, what is the scorecard? Financial analysts at Bloomberg concluded that the US made substantially more concessions than China. The New York Times observed that Xi had skillfully orchestrated a game of whack-a-mole, forcing Trump to chase different issues, soybeans, rare earth, TikTok, while Beijing remained strategically focused. Problem is, for months, Trump did this whole thing for months. He did all this stuff, all this talking, all this bravado, going on TV, holding up signs. He did all of that for months, only to end up right back to square one. Now, who is the strategic winner? The data is unambiguous. China won this phase of this war. It's clearly China is the winner. Beijing demonstrated that it could absorb massive tariffs through market diversification, technological self-reliance, and strategic patience. It showed that America's economic leverage was weaker than Trump assumed, especially when China controlled critical materials and maintained its own retaliatory capability. Most importantly, China proved that a well-prepared, economically sophisticated nation could stand up to American protectionism and force the world's largest economy to negotiate from weakness. The Financial Times noted that China had demonstrated global economic superpower status, proving that unlike 2018, when Trump's first trade offensive caught Beijing by surprise, this time, a more powerful China could fight its opponent to a standstill. American farmers lost billions in export markets. Global supply chains remained fractured and expensive. American consumers faced higher prices, even as tariffs were reduced to 40% to 47%, still double historical norms. Manufacturing didn't return to America. Instead, production simply moved to other places like Mexico, Vietnam, and Southeast Asia. Trump's trade war vindicated one uncomfortable truth. The global economy is too interconnected to weaponize tariffs without harming yourself. By January 2026, as truce entered its final months before potential renegotiation, uncertainty again haunted the global marketplace. This thing's causing tons of instability. You don't know what's coming the next day. You know, Trump says one thing today, tomorrow he changes his mind. He's for it this week. Next week he changes. But the rare earth control remained suspended, not repealed. So that means this rare earth stuff can come back again, and we're back to square one again. 47% tariffs, that remained in place. Both sides kept the most destructive weapons loaded and ready. What emerged from the 2025 trade war was not American dominance, not Chinese submission, but rather a new reality. Two superpowers locked in permanent competition, each constrained by its dependence on the other, both wounded, but neither defeated. Trump had learned that you cannot bully a determined rival with trillion-dollar export capacity and critical resources the world needs. And Xi had learned that aggressive American pressure, while survivable, was economically costly enough to justify periodic truces. The war, it seemed, would continue, but maybe not today, but who knows? Maybe New Year's is right around the corner, and we never know what the hell is going to come out of that White House. So I guess we'll stay tuned to find out. Well, guys, thank you for listening. That is all going to be all for today. If you like this content, if you like this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you soon. Thank you.